right now we're in the middle of a big change in technology and how people do what they do and what they need to know. Um, I was able to see us go from mainframes to mid-sized computers where everyone got together and had team meetings to talk about what they're going to do, what they're going to change. If something broke and it was my thing, then I had a pager and it went off and I had to go fix it. So we, even back then, worked in a semi-DevOps type environment. And we moved away from that a little bit with the introduction of mid-sized computers and then the PCs and LANs where we had in-tier solutions. We went to having an IT operations group, and they maintained the current environment. They did the troubleshooting for us, and what we did is we did the development work on our solutions, and then we pretty much threw them over the fence and that. So during that time, I found that there were primarily two different types of people. There were the type of people that liked to be on that leading edge of change and look at it and experiment and play with it. And then there were the normal people, and what they like to do is they like to gain expertise in a given area and then use that and continue to build their expertise. They might be the person that is the best programmer in the language that they use, or the best person with doing Excel spreadsheets. So what I want to talk about is how we can cause that organizational change and we can build a workforce ready for modern IT. Now, I was talking about that a little bit, and I said there were two different types of people. And I would put one of them as having the Woody mindset from the Toy Story. And they like working in the environment they're in. They really don't want it to change because they're very comfortable. They've got a good work-life balance. They know what they're doing. They know how to operate in the system, and they understand the system. And in this case, the silos on the left represent a line of businesses and the applications and the technology they need to complete their mission. And on the right, you've got a centralized IT group. There's operations in there. There's governance. There's the ERP type systems, etc. And the two stay fairly separated most of the time. But the IT operations, they try and run that show all up. And when you do that and you think about that, that is your current state is going to be somewhere in there. And it might be that you're doing traditional development of solutions where you put together a team that has a dev lead, a test lead, and developers and testers, and the testers write the test scripts and the developers write the code, and it's one checks against the other, and they start driving a solution forward. And then once they get done with it, it goes through load testing and a number of other types of tests. It gets packaged up and it gets handed off to operations, and operations has to put it in play, and then they've got to support it. So you might be working in that environment. You might have shifted to test-driven development. You might have gone past that and gone to a SOA type environment. Or you might be in DevOps. Who knows what it is? You might even be in an area where you're using virtual infrastructures, and rather than having somebody walk down the hall with a computer in their hand and slide it into a rack, you might have people that write a script and set up CPU and RAM and an operating system. And they do all that virtually. And some of them do it scripted, and it's completely automated. So believe it or not, I've seen people on both ends of the spectrum, and they run forward. But there is that mindset, and if you want to move to modern IT or more of the cloud-based solutions, or manage that digital transformation that everyone talks about, then you've got to figure out how to get from wherever you are to wherever you want to go. So then you've got the other side, and this is Buzz Lightyear from, again, the Toy Story. And he is go, go, go. He's very modern. He works in a federated environment where there are pieces in there, but each one of the developers and dev teams, they've got a box of Legos they get to play with, and they get to put together whatever they want as long as the stuff they need is in that Lego box. And if it isn't, then they can go ask for something different. But those are the tools they've got, and they're given a free rein to do whatever it is that they want to or need to do. Now, in that type of environment, they typically own and maintain whatever it is they deliver. And they fit it into that federated environment, but if there is a trouble call and it has to do with their environment, then they take care of it. And that is completely different than that Woody mindset. This is the buzz mindset. And these are the people that like to run around with their hair on fire. And this happens to be what I like. I really enjoy this. I've explored CI/CD and how you can put that into play, running DevOps or talking to people about no-ops, and looking at how we run things and how the user experience might be interesting, but typically our dev teams, they build to an API and then they expose the API and they leave the last mile to somebody that is going to mash up their information with other information to provide something relevant to the end user. So that would be the other mindset, and that seems to be where we're trying to get from a people perspective. When we start looking at that, a lot of people say, oh, well, I have got to, in part of my digital transformation, move everyone from that Woody mindset or the siloed traditional IT mindset over to a different mindset. I've got to move everyone over to digital transformation. They've all got to be doing DevOps and Scrum environments. They've got to sit in a room together and chat with each other, and they've got to do delivery. And we've got to do Scrum and daily stand-ups, and we've got to have Kanbans for our programs and really push all of that, and everybody's got to do it. And I would suggest that might not be the case. If you imagine a piano that doesn't have the black keys on there, you'd be fairly limited in what you do. So in order to operate an IT environment, you've got to have both types of people, and it is okay for people to stay in one place but not the other. They can stay with the traditional IT, but you need people that want to and will move to through that digital transformation so that they can help your organization move forward. And so what you've got to do is you've got to figure out, since they're people, you've got to figure out how to get people to move from one end to the other, or at least enough of them, and grow that so that you have enough skill to be effective at digital transformation. Do you have any, if you ever have comments, Jim, you want to say, then feel free to speak up.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And this is, our two talks are really tied to each other. What Andy just said is it's okay to have the Woodies and the Buzzes. And he's right. And a lot of times we don't think that that's right. We think everybody has to go into one bucket or the other. And I think that that balance is so absolutely necessary, especially when you're not a startup. If you're a startup like a Facebook or an Uber or a Lyft, you're going to start with mode 2 people in the bimodal way of looking at it, the Buzzes. But if you're not, and that's most of us, you're going to have Woodies and Buzzes, mode 1s and mode 2s in the bimodal way, but you're going to need them both, basically. I think, Andy, one of the things you and I joke about is how irrelevant a COBOL programmer became until now they're probably one of the highest paid entities on the planet.
And you've got to look under a lot of rocks before you find one.
Exactly.
Especially that admits it. Yeah. And what Jim just mentioned is Gartner, they talk about bimodal IT, and what they say is that there are two different speeds that you have to operate at, or two different ways that you have to approach. One of them is more the standard approach that you use, and the other one is using all the modern approaches. And what you want to do is, what do we say? We say solid at the core and agile at the edges. With that,
Exactly.
and that is what you want to do. And we're talking about how you can get a workforce to do that. Now, while you do need both those, people are real comfortable where they're at. I found that even me, I'm not looking at all the new technology every night. Sometimes I'll binge watch Game of Thrones, or I'll go and see my grandkids play at the playground, or practice a sport, or act in a play. I'll do something like that, and I found that I've got things other than technology that are always on my mind. With that, I am a lot more comfortable with doing things that I know I can do pretty easily without a ton of effort or learning or research on my part all night. So I start looking at that and I think, well, why do I really want to move from where I'm at to where they want me to go? And so you've got to find a way to incent people. And one of the ways you do that is you pay for performance. If you're in a mode 1, mode 2 type environment and you want to move towards modern IT and more of a DevOps type approach or something like that, then what you can do is you tie performance to and how you pay people and to what they deliver, and the delivery is against the objectives for the future state. So you can tell people, yes, I want you to continue doing what you're doing. It's okay to be a COBOL programmer, or it's okay to work in the environment you're at, and you don't have to change. However, that is going to limit the financial return you get, because the big bonuses are going to go to the people that are driving that change that is going to move our company forward. So that's one of the ways that you can incite that change. Another thing that you really need to do besides rewarding that movement to modern IT is you've got to expect failure, and you might not call it failure. This is a picture of Thomas Edison, and one of the things that he said is, I've not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. That's what we do. We try something, we probe, and that's the fail fast, fail often. You try things until you find the right path, and once you do that, then you start driving forward really hard. And with the environments that we have now, that's easier to do. I don't have to know that my solution is going to work, and I don't have to know everything before I ever start. I can start with a minimal amount of information, and I can set up a sandbox environment virtually. I don't have to go through heavy procurement that takes 3 months to get in hardware and then get it provisioned and put in place in my IT shop. Now I can tap a few lines of code and bam, I've got whatever I need and I can get started. So I have a lot more flexibility now than I did in the past. What you've got to do...
Andy,
Go ahead.
I'm going to chime in on this one, because I think you might want to, that's exactly right on the technology side. The technologies are there to enable us to have that agility, right? What about culturally? I sometimes find culturally we're so afraid of failure that even though the technology is there, we won't use it, because we're going to, what you were talking about earlier, you're used to doing it the way you've always done it. If you're in the Woody way of doing things, you're going to be afraid to fail at it because you don't really have the cycles. You've got to get it done. You're building to a deadline. And so how do you deal with that then? So how do you deal with the, obviously Thomas Edison got over it. So how do we encourage people to be more like Thomas and less like Woody?
Boy, and good point, Jim. Thanks for bringing that up. And it ends up being how we measure performance and what we're looking for. And one of the things that happens is if people are not failing, then they're not trying. And it's real easy to say that. And I've had a couple of executives tell me, yeah, You tried, you failed, you learned, and you moved on. And while they don't always reward that, at least they don't penalize you for it. But what we have to do is we have to shift over the way that that we incent and do performance reviews. One of the big trends that's coming up, it's been around for about 10 plus years, but it hasn't been in full practice. And now bigger companies like Microsoft and Amazon are shifting to it. But what they've done is they've always said, well, here you set your goals for what you want to do in the year, and you say, this is what I'm going to accomplish. And then at the end of the year, you look back and you justify your performance review, and you say, this is what I did against what I said I would do. And if you didn't hit those things and you were penalized, and we use the GE Jack Welch way of putting people into 3 buckets. You had the top performers, everyone in the middle, and then the bottom performers. And it was the bottom 10% or 7%. It was the top 10 or 20%, and then everyone else. And what you did is you tried to find a way to wash out the people in the bottom 10% and give extra reward to the people in the top 10 or 20%, and then everyone else, you just threw them whatever you had left over in order to keep them happy and satisfied. So due to the way that we did performance reviews and bonuses and pay, we drove that need to hit mediocrity, because while you would sure like to be in that top set, that top 10% is an awful lot of work. You just wanted to make sure that you did enough so that you didn't fall into that bottom 10% and get laid off or riffed. And a lot of times if you were in the middle, then you were okay with that. What we need to do is we've got to change performance over so that individuals are incented to try things and be bold and not be measured by something that they say they're going to do before they know anything about what they need to do. And with this newer approach, what you do is you have people describe what their superpower is, what they're most proud of that they did, and what they think they can do next. And that's a review, and it's typically very limited, like 60 words for each one of them. So you have to be very concise in your explanation. And then rather than having other people talk about your performance and write a novel about it, what they do is they just have, again, 60 words, and they answer what they think that your superpower is, what the best thing is that you bring to the table. And based on that, you get your review. And it's not about performance or hitting a goal that you set that doesn't matter. It's about what your potential is and what strength you bring to the group as a whole. And are you guys trying that at all, Jim, or anything like that?
We're probably in the first category, still looking this year to transition to the second category. We're still struggling with what does that mean, and I'm frantically writing on the whiteboard everything you said, so I'll have to go back and listen to what you just said, because I think there's some wisdom in it, which is rare to hear from me saying about you, but there's some real wisdom in what you just said about what's your superpower. And I think that that's important, but that's a culture change too in leadership, which is also difficult to do. Woody never wanted to be what Buzz was, and he fought against it with every essence of his life in the beginning of the first movie, if you remember. And that's what you run into when you're in these situations, is we just fight for that which we understand and know, even if we don't like it. And that's kind of a weird conundrum.
Yeah, and there's a interesting book on it that's about 10 years old, and I'll put the title of the book in my slide deck so that if you do download the one that I provide, I'll make sure that I've got the title of that book in there, and you can and anyone on the call can certainly look at it. It is the trend in where we're starting to go with workforce and how we do incentive. And what we're finding is that millennials are entering, and everything that we did know pretty much gets tossed out of the window. I've put together a number of high potential, hypo type programs where I've helped organizations identify their talent and then put them into accelerated programs so that they can quickly become the leaders of the future. And with millennials, there have been a lot of studies that have been done that show that the big 5 personality traits that you're looking for in the hypo programs, what you're looking for and how they manifest is different. So you've got to change the way that you look at it. And that goes with all of the performance review, human resources, incentive. You've got to shift all that up to fit into this new era that we seem to be running in. And right now we're at a point where baby boomers are retiring and millennials are coming in. That's a smaller group of people, and we just don't have enough physical bodies to do a one-to-one replacement. And the amount of people that are going through education and getting a 4-year degree is a lot less. So we don't have enough replacement people. And another thing that we've got to fix is how we find people. We can't say, oh, you've got to have a 4-year degree, master's preferred, so that you can be an admin or so that you can build my web page for me. You've got to have a different way to find the talent that you need and then bring them in and potentially grow them. So another piece of this is you're always, almost always, when I talk to leadership, they're like, how are you going to do it and how much is it going to cost? And I want an exact date, and I want an exact number. There's this person, Douglas Hub, and he wrote How to Measure Anything, Finding the Value of Intangibles in Business. And what he suggests is you take the approach that an actuary does. And in this case, I'm showing a bell curve, and I describe the resources on the left, and then on the bottom, I've got timeline, and I break that up by years or quarters, and I say, here's the very worst case, and here's the very best case for how long it'll take, and it's probably going to fall in the middle. So you can expect that light-colored band that we're going to get done in this time with these resources. And the resources might be people, it might be money, who knows what that is. But you get to describe those things, and rather than stick to a hard date and time and a hard budget, you're going very loosely. So you say, it's going to come in somewhere between here and here, and it's going to take about this amount of people and money in order to get it done. And most of the time, if you show that and you start tracking, believe it or not, leadership likes that, because they know that if you're giving them a hard date, a hard time, that you're not going to hit it and you're lying. So this way you're at least giving them some variance, and they're fairly comfortable with it. And then there's the now. No, I really mean now. And this is about having patience. And there's a movie, The High Road to China. One of my favorite sayings in there is, the ox is slow, but the earth patient. And there are a couple of football teams in the UK that have talked about that, and that's how they built up their teams, is to do that. And what you can't do is say, oh, we're going to transform and it's going to happen overnight and you're going to see great positive results and a change to the top line or the bottom line in months. You might be able to do that, but depending on where you're at in your journey, you're probably not going to be able to. And what you've got to do is you've got to set the expectation that the journey you're on could take 3 or 4 years, and of course leadership's going to say, but I might not be CEO in 3 or 4 years. And it's like, yeah, but that's what it's going to take. This is talking about the company, the entity, not you individually. And you can't say it quite that way, but that is what you're inferring, is that this is going to take this amount of time, and you can change it some, but not an awful lot. Um, and most people will talk about babies. They'll say, yeah, it takes 9 months to have a baby regardless of how many people you put on the job. Um, and you can maybe trim that down to 8 months if you start feeding the one that is carrying castor oil or something, I suppose, or get them walking every day for 10 miles. I don't know. I've never been pregnant. But but you've got to be patient, and you've got to set that expectation and say that those types of things can't happen overnight. They've got to happen over time. And so you're expecting the failure, you're trying to drive performance, and you're making sure that everyone is patient, and that is the leadership, but it's also the individuals that are being asked to change. If they've been doing something the same way forever and ever, and now you're telling them to do it completely differently, it is going to be uncomfortable. They're going to be uncomfortable in their skin. They're going to get angry at you. They're going to go through the 7 phases, and they're going to lash out. And at some point, they'll comply, and they'll start being able to move forward. But you've got to expect there's going to be a lot of stumbling, and there's going to be a lot of angst with different people. So you've got to recognize that, and you've got to manage or mitigate that as much as you can, but you've got to expect it, and you've got to also allow it to happen. You can't try and constrain it or contain it too much, because it's got to happen. Have you found that to be the case, Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. When you shared this quote with me, I think I've seen the movie. I don't remember the quote, but it's so true. The patience aspect of things is when you go into digital transformation and you're changing people change is the hardest thing you're going to do. And trying to do it in short order, contrapositive of the having a baby, basically another way of saying that too is you can't put 5 mothers to have 1 baby in 3 months. You can't shorten the timeline, but when you're a timeline, a lot of our organizations are timeline based. If you think about, what Amazon, Microsoft, T-Mobile are and carrier events, and any of the organizations out there have to produce things in shorter and shorter scales today. And what you are then forcing is you're giving your people less time to come up to speed, and you can't rush, if you will, that innovative way of thinking, that transformational way. When Scott does his talk on innovate as a verb, for instance, I hope he covers some of the ideologies around how you become innovative as an individual, because it takes time and it takes practice. But what you said earlier, it takes failure, and you've really got to embrace your failures, and you got to realize no matter how good you are, you're going to do it wrong the first few times, and that's okay. That's good. That's what we want. So I think you're absolutely right. This is probably my favorite slide so far. I love it, Andy.
Oh, good. I made what you like. Yeah. So when I start thinking about an environment, we have we used to have an enterprise architecture, and it was a big brick that was created and no one ever read. It had the principles and the governance and pages and pages and pages of stuff in it. And then we had what we actually did in an IT environment, and we've kind of shifted that around a little bit. We started changing that, so now we say that we've got playbooks, and then we have run books, and the playbooks are the strategy. They're what we want to do, and the last few slides are the playbook. They're the strategy. They're okay. I've got to take my people, I've got to grow them. How am I going to do that? I'm going to incent this type of behavior and not that type. And I'm going to set expectations like this, and I'm going to manage these things. So we have a playbook, and we know what we want to do or the strategy and how we're going to try and tackle this beast of digital transformation. So now we've got to hit the run book, and that is feet on the ground. Okay, now that I've got that and I'm live, how am I really going to make this happen? So one of the pieces on it is staffing, and I can put this slide up here because I've done consulting work. And what's one of the goals, right? To make sure that you can suck as much money as you can out. What we have to do inside of our organizations if we're doing digital transformation is we've got to start tying the statement of work and the payments to not just delivery of a product or a capability, but to transferring knowledge to the staff. And we've got to say, this is done by the outcomes. And once you've trained 5 of my staff to replace the 5 people on your team, then you get paid. And you're going to have to negotiate to get that type of thing in there. And it, believe it or not, is not as hard as you might think to do that. Almost every consulting company out there realizes they've got to do that now. So one of the ways that you can grow the amount of skill you need to be successful in digital transformation is by outsourcing or staffing from outside, or by buying a company that is a Mode 2 company, just so you have their people and their approach and you can put them on board. And then you can hopefully take them and use them as seed to start growing other groups in your environment. So you can do that, or you might wall them off. But you've got to think about how you can get enough information or enough tacit knowledge in your organization so that you can move forward with modern IT and actually do it. If you have people that have run traditional SDLCs and you're telling them, oh, you're going to run DevOps, then they're not going to be successful at it. They've got to have something, and part of the way you can do that is you can use augmented staffing to do that, or you can set up strategic purchases of companies, not only for the technology and the IP and the patents, but for the people that they have on board, because that is a valuable asset. So try and tie any money spent, especially around consulting, to delivery of knowledge transfer. And then there's incentive. How are you going to attract and keep people? It used to be you could just throw money at them, but in a lot of cases that isn't so. Especially with millennials, they've got a higher idea of what they want to do, and they're still thinking about Camelot. And what you've got to do is find a way to get them to come in. And some of the things that you're going to need to do is make the workplace cool. If you ever look at Google or Facebook website and you look at the careers and what they've got, they always show a fun, festive-looking environment with ping pong tables and soft serve ice cream machines and paint gun fights and whatever. They have things to make it look like a fun place to work. They also like to be seen as leading edge. They like to be out there on the front end of innovation, because then the people that are innovators and are working in that Mode 2 are going to be attracted to it. They're going to say, yeah, I want to work there. And then they want to be able to work people. They want to be able to work at a place that their friends will be jealous that they're working there. And I don't know if you saw, but last year GE ran an entire series of commercials, and GE is in the middle of this this digital transformation, and they're a 150-year-old company almost. They're trying to change, and they're trying to change the way that they're seen, and they're seen as an old stodgy place that you go to end your IT career. And the commercials they ran, they showed a young man saying, oh, I do this and this, and it was very interesting things. I'm making modern power plants that I can control with my phone. And then they cut to a friend of theirs that shows oh, I can make these dancing kitties show up on your cell phone. And what you're trying to do as an organization is you're trying to become that cool place, the place that people want to be, especially if they're on the leading edge. There are a couple of different ways that you can do that. Jim will talk about a few that they've got aspirations of doing.
Yeah, one of the things that we're really going to be doing we're doing a lot of digital transformation internally right now, but we look at success as two things, and you've touched on both, Andy. One is if we work ourselves out of a job, which sounds kind of weird, but that's how we measure success. If we automate so that people ourselves aren't needed as part of because of the automation, we consider that highly successful. That means we can go on to do bigger and better things within the organization. The other one that you touched on is making yourself incentivized to keep people around. And one of the things you'll start seeing in probably towards the end of the year is we'll start publishing a lot of what we're doing out on GitHub. And we're doing that for two reasons. One is we want to share everything that we're doing in digital transformation. We want to share it with everybody. The other one is we think that by sharing what we're doing, we're going to attract the type of people that we want. And so in some of our job descriptions today, we will look at your GitHub profile. What are you publishing out to the rest of the world? We have a very interesting interview process, but a lot of it has to do with what are you doing in the cloud community? What are you doing to the rest of the world? How are you sharing what you know? That's the type of people we're looking for. Those that are just so into it, they want everybody to know, what they're doing. Obviously, we're going to protect our secret sauce in every way and everything that we do. But most of the stuff that we've got, we can share scripts and system designs and things like that with the rest of the world. And what you're talking about is that's the millennial way of thinking. They are different, and that's who we have to attract, because they're the ones that are going to be making the next round of innovations in everything that we do. So we're going to do everything we can to attract them. So yeah, it's a major part of our strategy.
Good deal. So now that you've attracted them, how are you going to keep them around? And you can try throwing money at it, but we've known for a long time that money doesn't work. When you get a raise or a performance review, it lasts for less than a couple of weeks, and then the luster of it's worn off, and you're back in the same rut that you always were in. This is a picture of David Beckham, and I think this is a tactical error, because I was going to say he was on a soccer team because he loved the game and he loved performance and loved working with a performing team, and he wasn't about the money. But since he moved to the West Coast and joined a team in the U.S. on the West Coast for an awful lot of money, maybe I'm wrong in picking him, but most of us that don't get buckets of money thrown at us, there's got to be another way that we incent people, and part of that is we invest in their career, and that is we start do what they're happiest at, rather than saying, oh, you're on board and I need you to work on this project because it's critical to our org and our team and blah, blah, blah. What you do is say, what's going to make you happy? What do you want to work on? And Deloitte in their consulting group, when a lot of times when they spin up a new program, they have a manager, and the manager has to fish for people to join his team. And what they do is they say, yeah, this is what I've got. And so they've got to pitch it internally in order to get enough people on it to get it running. And then people can join that or not. And it's based on the individual manager and how they're perceived in the organization, and then whether it's a fun and cool thing to work on. And so we've got to start thinking a lot more like that. Hypo programs, or high potential programs, introduce people to upper management, and we've got to find ways to take care and nurture people in their careers and make sure they're getting fed what they need in order to be happy where they're at. Everyone likes to be regarded highly, and invested in by the organization. And so we've got to find ways to do that. And it's not just money. That's not going to get it done. It's got to be something else. Which brings me to training. We've got to make sure that we train people and that we're investing in them. And it isn't just 5-day courses you ship someone off to or letting them attend conferences. Those things are still important, and they're good ways to do knowledge transfer, but there are so many other ways you can do it internally. Most orgs that I know, they have some form of lunch and learns or brown bags. And what they do is individuals will want to talk on a subject, and there will be a classroom that they have set up. And if you want to learn something, there's a list of what topics are coming up, and you just show up there. You bring your sack lunch, or there's sack lunches there for you, and whoever it is goes in there. They talk about the subject that they said they're going to talk about. Another way to do it is with one-on-one mentoring. In most organizations, they have mentoring programs, but they're kind of a bolt-on afterthought. They're not really meant to drive knowledge transfer and accelerated growth of individuals. We try and do that, but a lot of times we're not very successful with it. And so we've got to find a way to structure the mentoring program to truly grow individuals and make it about the individual. And then apprenticeship is another approach to take. We're not going to find the talent that we need, so we have to find people with the potential to do what we need them to do, and then we need to apprentice them. And what I found, and I've got another talk that I've done on this, is that if you take the business skills and capabilities, something that are like mentioned in APQC, they have business process. And they say, for this business process, we need people with these skills to do that. And that's how you're going to get those business capabilities running, or capabilities running. You've got to have skilled people, and you've got to have a process that they follow, or an approach they do. With that type of training, you can use apprenticeship where somebody sits side by side and they watch someone proficient at the job do it, and then they share the duties doing it together after a few times, and then the master watches the apprentice actually go through the process and coaches them through that. And what you're doing is very quickly transferring that knowledge for skills acquisition that is tied directly to business process. And then the other piece of that is there's a set of soft skills that you've got to have, like interpersonal relationships and speaking in front of audiences and speaking to leadership, etc. And those you grow and drive through mentorship. So you try and separate the two out, but you use both of them. One aimed at skills acquisition for business process, the other one aimed at growing interpersonal skills and the skills that you need to move up in your career overall. So mentoring equals career, apprenticeship equals on-the-job training. So then the other tactical piece that you've got to take care of is organizational change management. And there are a number of different ways you can do it, but when you do it, it's tug of war. You're pulling people where they don't want to go. So what you have to do is know where you want them to go, and you want to find ways to best move them forward. There's a person that used to work for IBM. He's a thought leader there, distinguished engineer, and he came up with the Cynefin framework. And what he did is he organized areas up, and he talked about how you can affect change, and that is you can look at things that you have that are best practices, and those are, this is what we really need to know how to do. Here are the 5 steps to complete this, and you can do that in the IT environment. I want to do this thing. Here are the steps you go and do to do that. And then you've got things that are complicated, and they're a good practice, but they work at a different level, and they're complicated. They're hard to do, which is right next to complex. And the difference between complicated and complex is complicated, you know everything about it, and complex, you don't know everything about it. So if I were putting together a Boeing 747 or a 757 or a Dreamliner or an Airbus, then it's complicated, but everything is known, and it just takes a good group of people working together to make that happen. If it is putting a wiring harness in, then that might be a best practice. And if it's complex, you're building a new type of airplane that you wouldn't know. And then there are novel practices. And what you want to do with change management is you want to know where you're at and where you want to drive to. And a lot of us are operating in complicated environments, and we have some complex environments that we work with. And what we want to do is we want to shove those down into chaos, and that is cause an emergency or a fire, and that'll get people moving and thinking of innovative ways to move forward. And then it shoots back up through complex to complicated, and you can push it back to best practices. So you start shoving things through this cycle to move them and change behaviors in people. And the way you can cause people change where you're looking for it is to move it into chaos. And then once they see that, then they know they've got to do something, they've got no choice, and they really start moving it forward. And that was just about everything that I had. I went a few minutes over what I expected, but if there are any questions, or Jim, if you have comments, feel free.
So I think people are probably typing in questions, and while they do that, I might have you just dwell a little bit more on the people change management and the complexities when you've got, I'm going to say, executive buy-in, and then options when you don't have executive buy-in, kind of you're in the middle, right? You're either going to go bottom up or top down, or you do both, but what do you do when one of those is failing, if you will?
Oh, and that's a good question. And typically, there are two ways that I've seen it fail. And one of them is leadership is bought in, and you go down, or leadership has changed, and they say, I'm the new sheriff in town, and here's how I'm going to operate. And then the people say, yeah, you're the new sheriff, and I give you a year, and you're going to be gone, so all I have to do is wait this out, and then I'm going to win, and I don't have to do what you say. And I have a very specific example of that where I had leadership buy-in and pretty much a leadership mandate. They said, we want everybody in this org to get a certification. So I put that into their review goals so that the individuals were reviewed, performance reviews based on getting some kind of a certification, a technical certification. And what I found is people said, I really don't have to do that, because they knew about how their bonus worked, and half their bonus was based on, this was consulting, so half their bonus was based on how they were utilized and how much they were utilized, as opposed to being on the bench. And the smaller part of their bonus was tied to things like writing technical content or getting certifications, etc. So when they did that, if they had the one thing that they didn't do, for instance, certification, then they just didn't do it. It didn't have any impact on them. They waited it out until the messenger or got killed or the leadership changed. And so I had a problem where that was an epic failure. And then the other one was around leadership. And I had everybody's buy-in in the org to do a certain thing. I wanted to change the way that we created technical content and how we displayed it to make it more worthwhile for the people. And it didn't have buy-in from the leadership. If it's the leadership driving and the people that are failing, then what I've done a bad job of, and what I've got to change, is I've got to put myself in their shoes and I've got to think like they do. So I've got to put on my empathy hat and think, if that were me, then how would I react and why would I react that way? What pain would that cause me? And before I ever present something to that group, I've got to go out and I've got to say, here's what I'm thinking and here's why. Tell me what you think. And I've got to work with people. And when you look at, there's a book called Blink, you find the people that are the mavens. They're the ones that everybody listens to whenever there's a change going on. And then there are the connectors, and those are people that know everybody. And what you have to do is you have to focus on the connectors and the mavens, because mostly the mavens trust the connectors. So you want to make sure that as you're reaching out to people and getting feedback, you want to identify those two types of people. You want to get their feedback and their buy-in before you start, so that they're evangelizing for you before you ever present something out. Now, if it's the leaders that are filling with the group, then again, it's or if it's and that, so in that case, what you're doing is you're getting the masses to move forward, and it's just like police in a riot. They don't like riots because they know that they're outnumbered, and they know that whatever the herd wants to do, they're going to do. And Jim, the book you're going to talk about in your talk speaks to that. It's Driving an Elephant. And so with that, if you can get the mass behind you, then the leadership will change. If the leadership is trying to do something, then what you have to do is you have to figure out what will incent people to have those behaviors, and you've got to marry the two together, as opposed to making it an edict. Or the other way you can approach it, and the way that is more successful, is you light the building on fire. We're going to have layoffs. We've got to change, or we're going to be bought by another company. Whatever that thing is, you cause a fire for the people, so that they know that they've got to change and they can't stay the same.
Cool. So, and you're right. I'll be talking about the book Switch, and the elephant is really, your talk is really about the elephant, in the sense that that's the emotional side that we have to get in culture change, people change, and things along those lines. You work and have worked in a lot of digital companies, and I'm going to kind of now ask a different kind of question. You are, okay, I'm going to say no spring chicken. I think you're 2 months older than me, and but you are a buzz, okay? So let me ask this question. Have you run into situations where it's like a role reversal, where you're polling, if you will, your millennials to try to become more digital, because that's where your head is, and because you're one of those people that all your career you've always been on the bleeding edge, right? How do you deal with their reluctancy to, I'm going to say, jump on the bandwagon and so forth in their careers? Because we've talked a lot about the people that are established in the woodies, but what about the new buzzes that are coming up? But they're, one of the things about millennials is they don't deal with challenge and change the same way that others have in the past. So how do you deal with that?
Oh, one of the ways that I do that is I do, and I'm glad you brought this up, I do an awful lot of apprenticing, where I bring people in and they've got potential, they've got a very strong skill set, they're very innovative, but they don't know how to take that and move it forward. And what I do is I try and take a very a personal and interactive role in what they're doing, and I don't pretend that I know everything, but I talk about what I do know and the experiences that I've had, and I try and listen twice as much as I speak, because I've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so I try and let them do most of the speaking. And when I hear things, I try and make sure that everything I say is impactful and will resonate with them. And I put it in a language that they'll understand, and that they can see the value for. And I don't shove anything down their throat. Normally I do exercises with them, but it's very high touch, one-on-one. For instance, I was talking to one person about time management because they're having a hard time with balancing their career with they're still in school and prioritizing the work that I had. And so I went through a time management exercise, and I didn't say, I know everything, try this. I said, let's talk about this and let's discuss it. And we found 3 or 4 different ways to look at time, that 24 hours you have in a day, and how you can segment it and how you can think about it and how you can budget it. And I didn't give all the answers. I let them work through and discover things, and then I pushed them where they needed to go in order to hit the keys that I was looking for. And then I provide them with a set of tools and give them the freedom to try and use the tools, but also take the freedom to use them any way they wanted. And that, I think, doing that last piece of it, giving them a tool, saying this is how I used it, but why don't you take it apart and put it together the way you want it? I think those things help quite a bit.